Morning, all. Happy Sunday. I'll be reading from 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. You may be seated.
All right, well, good morning. Just doing all right? Man, slimmer crowd today. Well, it's summertime, people away. Certainly want to remember those who are traveling. Certainly want to remember those who are still serving at camps in different places. Want to remember those who are away, being with family in times of grief. Think of like the Piasecki and the Petrillo and the Heron family. They're away with family there. With the passing of Bobby's sister. It's great to be with you who are here and to worship together and to come to God's Word together. And we're going to start by, you guys watch some of the All-Star festivities that were in Philadelphia over the past week? Did you guys watch some of that? Yeah. Oh man, well this analogy might fall flat. How about the All-Star game, or not the All-Star game, the home run derby on, what was that, Monday night? Anybody watch that? All right, a little bit. We got a few posts. So the thing is, if you listen to, certain national commentators, even read articles the next day, like you might have found them saying stuff like that the Philadelphia crowd sort of stole the show. Right? Because in true, typical, crazy Philadelphia sports fandom, they really got into this home run derby, and the place was hopping, it was rocking, it almost felt like, Citizens Bank Park does in Red October when they're chasing their playoff run and things like that. Especially when their own Phillies players were coming up trying to, crush some home runs, right? When Kyle Schwarber was coming up into the plate, man, people were on their feet cheering, and the place was super loud. And on top of that, right, whenever one of Schwarber's opponents would come, whether it was in the semifinals or in the final rounds, and they would come to the plate, Philadelphia fans in true fandom would stand up and boo really loud. And, if he hit one out, they would boo, and if he missed one, the place would erupt. And you could tell that the commentators, this was strange. It was not normal custom in these home run derbies, and they were loving it. They were cracking up. I think Phillies were even booing, the poor little kids that were out in the outfield. If they dropped the ball and they didn't catch it, they were booing them then. Philadelphia being strange sports fans is nothing uncommon, but it was interesting the next day to even hear some of the national commentators that would listen, would talk about how, they were really the center, they were really the main characters, and they sort of just stole the whole show. And the thing is, right, you would expect maybe this strange, quirky, crazy, peculiar Philadelphia sports, but maybe will have impact down the road, and that next year's home run derby, wherever it is, maybe we'll have a little bit more pep and excitement to it than it often does in the past. Maybe whatever city is hosting it, if one of their players comes up to the plate, they'll show the same enthusiasm. Maybe even we'll catch them continuing the tradition of booing opposite. Who knows? And for whatever reason, as I was jumping back into where we are here in 1 Peter as we're working through the book, this was coming to mind. Maybe it's because the two were going together and I was coming out of I don't know what. But we're in this section in the book where you can tell that it's on the heart of Peter that individuals and the broader society outside of the church would somehow be impacted by the church, right? You can tell it's his heart that individuals and the greater society would somehow catch a glimpse of the glory of God, somehow come to some kind of understanding of the incredible things that God has done for the world through Christ. And in that, somehow be led to and perhaps entrust themselves to this glory and to this hope now that the church understands, and have this whole new freedom and way of life as a result. Okay, and the strategy, if you pick it up, is that the church would be a strange, peculiar people that makes impact in some way. You see the connection there in my head? There's a connection there. Maybe you see it, maybe you don't. Anyway, but for Peter, that's part of the strategy, that they would be a strange, peculiar people, or to use Peter's language, a holy people, which quite literally means set apart, distinct, very different, that offers the world an alternate way to go at life, and does it in such a compelling way that maybe as the outside world looks at it, they might become curious about it and ask questions. What is this strange hope that you have that gives you this strange freedom in life? As we'll see a little bit later on as we keep working through chapter 3. All right, and if we break down that strategy a little bit more, like what we have come to see is that on the one hand, Peter is saying, okay, but I want you also to sort of accommodate certain existing social realities and certain structures here in Roman society, so that in a sense, it's almost like so that you're not making a whole lot of waves, and that people have, reason or occasion to label you as bad for society or as evildoers, as they are prone to do. And yet I want you to do that, Peter says, in a unique way that, again, shows the world something different, or maybe subtly even subverts those social realities and those social structures and systems that you are a part of. Okay, and we're in this section now where these instructions are a little bit uncomfortable. And these instructions that Peter is giving, they kind of grind against some of our modern sensibilities precisely because he is now on multiple occasions telling somewhat socially weak and vulnerable people to continue subjecting themselves to those above them in the society, even when those above them in the society are not treating them properly, right? So you go back 2 weeks ago, and he's calling the church, the exile community, in a place that doesn't feel like home. That certainly doesn't feel like the kingdom of Christ, but doesn't feel like home, to remain in subjection to the emperor and to the governor, to show honor to the emperor. This emperor who's starting to turn the screws and pick up and intensify the persecution unjustly against these Christians. Remain in subjection to him. Or last week, slaves. He writes to slaves of the ancient Roman society, remain in subjection to your masters. And he clarifies that, not just the just and the kind and the sympathetic ones, but to the unjust ones who treat you harshly. Right? And so today, sorry, I'm not advancing my slides as always. We're talking about the ancient church now, not the Philadelphia sports fans. But right, and today, in a similar way, he writes to women and to wives, within the household structures and the household codes of ancient Roman society. Women who, back in that day, had certainly a lot less standing and rights and legal opportunity and things like that in the modern world. And to these women in a social weakness, he says to them, remain in subjection to your husbands. And not just, the good and godly Christian husbands, but to the one who are disobedient to the word. Right? Why? You picked it up. So that they may be won over without a word, but through your testimony and the way that you go at it, right? So you see again, Peter's strategy. We sort of accommodate to these existing structures, but you do it in a way that is winsome, that provokes curiosity, so that maybe these individuals and the broader culture, even that unjust culture, will be won over to Christ and to his kingdom. Oh, and then at the end of our passage, he all but lobs a bombshell when he starts to talk about husbands and how the husbands are to relate to their wives. And so we're just going to talk our way through this, and we're going to have to wrestle, as we have the past couple of weeks with, the part of this that grinds But I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time or maybe answer all the questions that I'm sure we're going to have on this, because I want to get to there really are some very practical things that you can just feel coming out of the heart of Peter as we work through this. All right, so let's talk about this whole set of instructions that he gives to the wives, to the women here. And I guess the first thing I have to say is that we have to be careful in how we are going to apply this section to our modern context in the modern church, right? And the reason why is because, again, remember the context here. All of these instructions, whether it's to the church and the emperor, whether it's to slaves and their masters, or to women and to their husbands, even the unfaithful ones, it all comes under that heading that we've been circling back on each week. Keep your conduct honorable among the Gentiles or among the Roman standards, right? He's not saying here, keep your conduct honorable by virtue of Christ and his kingdom. Keep your conduct honorable among the Gentiles so that when they see your deeds, they may be led to give glory to God on the day of the return of Christ, right? You pick that up. So again, we adapt and we accommodate to existing structures. Okay, but which makes it tricky then now as we're applying it to a modern context, which has different sensibilities and which would define honorable conduct in different way and has different structures. Right? Or maybe the way to put this, as we have become aware, hopefully, that there still exists modern forms of enslavement, and that in horrifying ways, like we understand that still young people and young women are trafficked in sexual slavery. And I can say with full certainty that we would not take 1 Peter and say, if we ever came across one of those people who had been trafficked and sold into slavery, oh, well, you need to stay in subjection to your master. Because there it is in 1 Peter, even to the cruel and unjust ones who are treating you harshly. Of course we wouldn't say that. We would say, well, we would do everything we can to liberate them, and we would encourage them to do the same, to seek their freedom, to escape the oppression and the injustice that is happening to you, right? It would be not honorable conduct. If anything, it would be offensive conduct if we went to modern day slaves because of the way our culture that we are a part of. And we said, be in subjection to these masters who are holding you in sexual slavery. Right? This was the horrifying mistake that the church in the South made when they would use this passage to justify the institution of slavery. That's not what Peter's doing here, right? Do you understand that? He's saying we're accommodating to a certain structure in that ancient day, but are we on the same page? Do you get where I'm at? This is hard. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. We continue to unpack that. But so what that means is, well, we have a same question when it comes now, well, would we be saying to the same thing to wives, to remain in subjection to your husbands, even to the unjust ones? And, well, I don't know. It's a fair question to say if Peter was writing to the church in a modern American society, would he use these same set of instructions? And honestly, I don't know if he would. Okay, so we have to be careful though, right? Some of the women here all of a sudden are saying, I knew it. They're looking at their husband. I don't need to listen to you. We're watching what I want to watch tonight when we settle down in front of the TV. Well, a couple of things. You still have to deal with the Apostle Paul who says similar things and comes at it from an entirely different motivation than Peter is doing here. I'm just saying Peter, that's not his intent. He's doing something differently here. But even still, I think if Peter was writing to the modern American context, the modern American church, I don't know, would he talk about subjection less or more? Because you've picked it up. We've talked about this. Peter has no problem with the concept of subjection. He considers himself, well, we saw it 2 weeks ago. He considers himself on the one hand completely free. And he calls the church to live as completely free individuals. And yet he considers himself a what? A slave to God. Right? And our modern mind sees that dichotomy and say, well, how in the world do those two things go together? Right? Because in the modern world, freedom means unhindered or unimposed opportunity to pursue your passions and your dreams and goals and whatever you want in life. And for Peter, it's possible that that's actually the very opposite of what genuine freedom is. Right? Freedom is being actually liberated from a lot of these passions that he would say wage war against your flesh. so that you actually have freedom to live into the design and to the purpose of the one who made you, who gave you life, and knows best how that life is well lived and well enjoyed. For Peter, that is a life that is genuinely free, and that is a life that is genuinely full of joy and blessing. And so for Peter, look, if God has a purpose and a calling, and if he is calling you to a certain mission in life that involves subjection, even to unjust people, freedom is you live into that. Because God's calling and his purpose and his mission for you is the life of freedom. And it is the life of blessing. And it is the life of confident hope because, as he'll say, the Spirit of God rests upon you. And I think you see this as it plays it out through the rest of the chapter, right? Or the rest of his instructions. He starts to talk about their adornment. And says, don't let your adornment be external. Fancy clothes, gold jewelry, fancy hairdos, or whatever. But let it be internal. Right, that imperishable internal beauty of gentleness and quietness. Right, and so again, you think about it in its context. In the ancient world, it's very similar to the modern world. People wanted to be seen, they wanted to be noticed. And your attire and your jewelry and if you had such things, the majority of people Peter's writing to don't have those things, but there are some who do. And if you have those things and you can wear the fancy, expensive clothing and you can wear the nice jewelry and put your hair up all in a fancy way, you might get noticed. But what is a little bit different in the ancient context is that literally your clothing, it's even hard to describe, but it literally was your identity. Like you dressed, certainly in the public arena, according to your class and according to your status. Right? And so if you had a means and opportunity, well, yes, you wore wealthy clothes and you wore fancy jewelry and you did your hair up all right to show, yes, that you were someone of elite social status. You were part of that wealthy class that was up at the top. And as part of that, this is part of the reason you would do that, you were entitled to all the privileges and all the honor and all the treatment that was rightly due to those who were up on the higher classes, right? Again, Roman society, very socially stratified society, all things aimed to the top. And so if you have the means and if you were up at the top, that was your identity. So people could see you, oh yes, you're up there, you're entitled to this, I respect and I give honor to you and all that sort of stuff. And they could lord it over them. Maybe you think of some spoiled, bratty heiress, right, who's lived their whole life in luxury and comfort and just sort of grows up thinking that the world ought to revolve around them and to cater to all their needs and desires and whims and whatever. Like there was a sort of sense that you could do that if you were in the upper class and you could demonstrate that in your clothing. And well, yes, you were entitled to that and you could lord that over whoever you wanted. Yeah, and Peter's saying, no. There's something entirely different going on in the kingdom. And as you represent the kingdom and as you represent Christ, let your adornment be something different. Let it be of the imperishable beauty of gentleness and quietness that is not always clamoring for your entitlement and what you are due and what the world should owe you. Or doesn't lord it over people and demand things, but is gentle, right, in the manner of Christ. Or for Peter, what I think he even more wants you is to demonstrate the freedom from all of that clamoring for status and privilege and entitlement, to actually be free to live a life in imitation of Christ. And for Peter, you certainly can do this, right? Because in a world that's clamoring to be seen, like how often does Peter say, you understand who you are, right? You understand you are God's holy people. You're his royal priesthood, he calls them. You are his treasured possession. Like, what status are you trying to attain that you haven't already been granted in Christ? And because you have that status, you understand you've been born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Christ. And though you don't see him now, you rejoice as you are attaining the goal of your salvation, right? The redemption of your very lives. So what could you possibly be entitled to here that is not yours by right, by virtue of your belonging to Christ and holding this exalted status? Do you see where he's saying? Okay, so, again, if he's writing to the modern context, maybe he would change it a little differently, but I feel like he would be going after that in just as harsh way. I mean, because we are still a society, I think we understand this, where image and beauty and maybe status and whatever would come along with that, are very, very important things. Dare we call them obsessions? Right, there's indication that these things, the chasing and the pursuit of beauty and I don't want to, we're almost becoming enslaved to it all, and it's becoming this cruel taskmaster. Well, we talked, you can read anywhere that younger generations especially are facing debt crisis in ways that they hadn't seen before. And one of the now fastest growing contributors to debt among young people is fashion and cosmetics. They've got all these, have you seen these? They've got buy now, pay later apps, where if you see something that you like and you don't have the resources to buy it at the moment, or maybe you have bad credit and don't have a credit card, or maybe you're a younger person and you aren't old enough to have a credit card yet, well, you can get one of these buy now, pay later apps, and you ding that thing and it'll pay for it, and you can pay it back over 4 easy installments over a flexible time span, whatever it is. And 40%, I think, is the statistic of what these buy now, pay later apps are being used for: fashion and cosmetics. I think there's been other studies done. The estimation is that half of all of Gen Z have used these buy now, pay later apps to purchase fashion and cosmetics, right? Because even more in the younger generations, more so even, it's a image and beauty obsessed culture. There's this thing called Snapchat dysmorphia. Have you heard of this? Snapchat dysmorphia, right? If you go on Snapchat or some of these social media apps, right, there's filters. If you're going to take your picture and you're going to load your picture up on Snapchat, or send it in Snapchat or load it up on whatever, social media, you can apply a filter to it, through it. You can apply, sorry, I have a cold, so my head's probably, so if you don't understand what I'm saying, don't worry about it. I don't know if I'm making sense. But you can apply this filter so that, and what do these filters do? Maybe in the olden days, the filters would just kind of soften the colors and paint, better lighting or whatever. But now, what do these filters do? They tighten the skin a little bit and remove some wrinkles. Or they make the eyes just a little bit bigger and brighter. Or they narrow the nose a little bit for you, make it a little bit smaller, right? To make the image, why? Because not only do we desire to be seen, but we are nervous about how we are being seen, right? And so we want to put our best curated image out there for the world to see. And if a filter will help with that, well, that's great. So now what they're seeing is that there's all these plastic surgeons. And they're saying, it's interesting. In the olden days, people would come in with pictures of their favorite celebrity and say, hey, can you make my face look a little bit more like this? The cheeks or whatever. Now, people are coming in. They're coming in with their Snapchat avatars or their filtered image and saying, I want to look more like this, right? Or, I don't know, we could just talk, about the ways that, this image-obsessed culture and the ways social media propagates that. Like I read somewhere, somebody said, that just even passive scrolling is actually a very dangerous thing for yourself. It's actually more dangerous than active intentional scrolling, because in passive scrolling, you're just scrolling through things and you're constantly being inundated by people who are able to put forth their best curated self and the rich, fancy lives that they're living. And you are constantly led to now measure your life in relation to all that. And it leads to increased bitterness and envy and dreaming, and especially for young teenage girls, right? Like this increased anxiety. We've talked about this before. All of which is to say, if Peter was writing to the church, he would say, hold on a second. Do you not see who is more free here? Right? The one who is beholden to these things and showing up in plastic surgeons with their avatar, or who's running into debt, who is leading lives of anxiety because of all this, or the one who is actually free to live a gentle and quiet spirit. And he would want to say to you, do you understand this freedom is available to you in Christ? Do you understand who you are as his treasured possession, his royal priesthood? And do you understand that the hope that you have, so that all this beauty and image that you're chasing after, for what, has already been granted to you? So live free of that. Just quickly, he goes on to mention Sarah, wife of Abraham. Right? Like, be like Sarah, who yielded to her husband. Well, actually, what he says, who put their hope in God, and out of that hope in God was able to yield to their husband and call him Lord. It's actually an interesting passage. We don't know where he's quoting that from in the scriptures. It's probably most likely he's quoting that from another Jewish source of Jewish tradition. But the interesting thing was, if you think of like Sarah's life, like there are multiple occasions, Genesis 12, Genesis 20, where she yields to Abraham's instructions to her, which are very sketchy, and put her in dangerous, compromising, unjust situations as they're traveling about and as they are being exiles in Egypt. Remember when they go down into Egypt in a foreign, strange, scary, uncomfortable place? What does Abraham say to Sarah? Hey, Sarah, when we go there, pretend not to be my wife, but be my sister, because it won't go well for me if you say you're my wife. And so what happens? Pharaoh says, oh, that's his sister. That's not his wife. I can take her and be part of my harem. And so he does. And God intervenes. Pharaoh comes to Abraham. Abraham, what did you do? You brought this curse on me, sends her back. And then several chapters later, in chapter 20, when they're sojourning through the Negev, they come up to Abimelech. He does the same thing again. Sarah, pretend that you're my sister, not my wife, because it won't go well for me. And what does Abimelech do? Well, look at this hot lady over here. Doesn't belong to this guy, so I'm going to take her into my harem. And God intervenes again. Same thing happens again, right? And the point is, like, what is he drawing attention to? He's not just drawing attention to be like Sarah, who just says, yes, Lord, to Abraham. But the key phrase there, whose hope is in God. And out of that hope in God, she is free to act in different ways. And that's his heart, it's his desire for you, that you would be set free of the gospel, that your hope and your confidence would be in what God has done for you, that you can be living free of this, I don't know, everything that our culture holds out. Do you see it? Sorry, there's so much more I could say there, but we haven't even got to the husbands. This bombshell that he lobs when he starts to talk about husbands. Right? And you have to understand the context here. Man, this is an ancient patriarchal society where the husbands are the head of the house. What's the Latin term? Pater noster, I don't know, whatever. Yeah, it's patriarchy, right, exactly. There's some other Latin phrase, but it means that the husband is at the head, and everything else in the house aims at the desires, the interests, the needs of the husband. The husband had all the power. He had all the legal standing. He owned all the property. He owned all the house. A woman couldn't, divorce her husband and have any legal standing or get half the assets. No, it all belonged to the husband. Everything in the house aimed at the desires and the interests of the husband. So how subversive, how alternate of a society is it that he then writes to the husbands and says, first off, live with your wives in an understanding way. Live with your wives in a way that understands who she is, understands her desires, understands her needs, understands what she's going through, or maybe also understand what God's intention is for her in the home. A husband in the ancient days, wait a minute, why do I need to do that? Right? It's her role to attend to my desires and my needs. That's how ancient society worked. She needs to know who I am and what I desire and what I need. Why am I concerned for that? Or show your wife honor as the weaker vessel, he says. And that's not a term of inferiority in any way, shape, or form. It's a statement of raw Roman fact. Right? Not only is there maybe a certain physical strength to the man, but more than that, in a sort of legal or social concept. The husband was in the position of power and strength. The woman had none. She's the weaker vessel in the thing. And in ancient society, honor always aimed at the powerful and the mighty and those at the top. In the kingdom, it's inverted. You show honor to the weaker vessels. You show honor to those who are overlooked. You always show honor to those who are so often neglected by the broader society. And so he says, you show honor to your wife. And then he says, as equal heirs of the grace of life. Again, like, do you understand what he's saying there? In this world where women were not equal heirs, they were not heirs in any way, shape, or form. The heir went to the son. And again, she divorces her husband. She has no right to anything. She has no heir. But in the kingdom, you don't outrank your wife. And you are equal heirs with her of the grace of life and the grace of kingdom. So you show honor. You be concerned to know and to understand and care with honor and love. And then perhaps it's such bombshell after bombshell after bombshell. For the sake of your prayers, he says. Man, in the ancient world, the gods didn't even listen to the weak. The eyes of the gods, if they were on humanity at all, was on the mighty and the powerful and those who were in positions of prominence and could lord it over, who could dominate. And you see what Paul is saying, or you see what Peter is saying here? Yeah, you act that way towards your wife. You act in some sort of domineering way that has some sort of sense of entitlement that she is supposed to serve and to show honor to you, and you just receive that honor instead of showing it. Do you understand that the ears of heaven may be closed to you? And how shocking that would have been. So actually, perhaps the word that is most significant that you need to hear is the very first word, where he says, likewise. It's the same word that he used when he says to the wives, after talking about servants being in subjection to their masters. Likewise, wives, be in subjection. Likewise, husbands. What is he essentially saying there? He doesn't even have to use the word subjection, but what is he saying? Likewise, husbands, you in your position of power and authority and control, you take all of that and you yield it, you subject it to the well-being of your wife and to the honor that is due to her. I mean, we can go on and we could talk, all day about how this elevation of women in that way and the honor that was starting to be shown to them in these homes, ultimately had deep impact on how women were treated and how so much of we've talked about this before, our modern impulse and our concern that women would be treated fairly, like that comes from the Christian Revolution that literally flipped the world on its head, right? But I would say too, and we will just begin to wrap this up, but so even if as a result of that, we don't live in a society that's patriarchal anymore, man, there's still so much opportunity, especially for you husbands here, to live in a radically subversive way that treats your wife in a certain way that is honorable to her and also shows a watching world the glory of God and the glory of who Christ is, right? To think about this idea of, I've been a little challenged by this, to relate to your wife in a knowledgeable way. I like to think of myself as a good modern man, who helps out around the house, who does dishes and, helps out with dinner and, if the kids, need whatever. I still don't give the dog baths. Maybe I could do that a little bit more because I know that's what. But it has occurred to me, and I've been noticing this a little bit more lately, that, okay, so maybe I'm stepping in, more of the responsibilities. But I think when it comes so much to the emotional and maybe even the spiritual weightiness of the well-being of the home, I feel like Amy bears that more than I do. Partly she's wired that way. I'm wired to compartmentalize things, to check out when it's time to check out. Amy doesn't have that wire. She's missing that. And you can tell, she carries, the more the mental and the emotional and the spiritual weight of the well-being of the kids and the well-being of the household. And so I've been challenged that maybe, for me to live in a more understanding way is to understand that weight that she carries. And the weight that's added to her on top of being a good friend and a good sister and a good, sister in the church, all these things. Maybe to be living in an understanding way and to know that means that I have to step up my game and to be a little bit more understanding of the weightiness of the home. And sorry, I get a little convicted by it, right? And things that are going on there. Or we could let's stop talking about me, because that clearly doesn't go well. Right, everybody else, right? If you're here and you're a husband and you think that, right, if you treat your marriage and you treat your wife the way maybe the broader cultural construct of marriage, goes where, yes, I'm going to love you and I'll show honor to you and I'll be there for you, even sacrificially, so long as my needs, my desires are being attended to. And you're being present with me, and you are, affording me these things that I think I deserve, right? But the moment that you don't, and though my needs and my desires aren't being met, and my expectations, you're forgetting about those, well, I reserve the right to withdraw, or even worse, to go find some other way that my needs and my desires would be satisfied, or something along those lines. Man, but do you understand that Peter is calling you to something totally different? He's calling you to the manner of Christ, to live with your co-heir in the grace of life as your covenantal partner, and to show honor and sacrificial love to her, even when life is messy for her, or when sin has gotten the best of her and she's not able to, or she's not desiring to attend to you in the way that maybe you would like to be attended to. Right? The example of Christ says, well, that's precisely the opportunity that I have now, and that's precisely the moment that I have to live as Christ and to show honor and to show reverence and sacrificial love to my wife. And do you do it for the sake of your prayers? Right? Do you understand that? Oh man, again, if you come back to me, if I come here and I sing the songs and I put on my smiley face and I talk to you all in there and I preach the word in a way that garners a certain respect, but then when I go home behind closed doors and I'm in any way harsh, or I'm neglectful, or I'm emotionally withdrawn, or I treat Amy out of a sense of entitlement, do you understand that I do that to the hindrance of my spiritual well-being? For the sake of your prayers, Peter says, you live with your wife in this way. So you can see what a bombshell this would have been in the ancient culture, and it still is today. Right, but we got to close it up. We could talk all day about the challenges and the practical things. But I feel like we come back every time, like we don't do these things because this is the moral high ground or this is just the to-do list that Peter's holding up. You do this because the life of blessing is a life that is lived in imitation of Jesus Christ, who himself was gentle and quiet. As a sheep before its shearers is silent, so the Son of Man was silent before his accusers. Or he's gentle, such that a bruised reed he will not break. And as you come to him in your weakness, and in your times of trial, in your times of temptation, when sin has got to the best of you, yet he doesn't cling to his entitlements and what he is due, but he comes to you in gentleness and graciousness, loving you, bestowing that same honor upon you. And to husbands in the same way, right? This Christ who was at the very top, the apex of everything, and to whom was due all sense of honor and privilege and entitlement. What does he do in that position of power and privilege and authority? He yields it and he submits it to the very end of his life, for your life and for your well-being. Man, look, if you're here and you don't know Jesus Christ, I get it. All of this probably sounds strange and it sounds risky. And why in the world would you live that way? If you don't know Christ and you don't know what he bestows upon you and the hope that he offers, then yes, life is you grab whatever you can and you hold on tight with it because that's all you got. But man, if God has sent forth his Son in gentleness and humility to lay down his life for your life, and if he has been raised victorious over life and death, man, for all of us, you are set free to live in imitation of him, to not just treat others as consumer goods that we use so long as they are satisfying us, but that we give our lives to show honor and love and care. And we pray that as we do that, the watching world would see and be curious and wonder, what is this hope, this strange hope that you have, so that they may find life and understand the glory of God, in whose name we pray. Amen.